Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Summit Bid Podcast. Long time no see.
Indeed.
I am your host, Kemper.
And I am your co-host, Toby.
Co-host, should I say co-host first, or because there's two of us?
No, I feel like you're the official host.
Am I the official host? I don't feel like the official host.
Well, you do the intros and stuff.
That's true. I'm the one who says hello, everybody.
If anyone here is an OG listener to the Exposure Compensation Photography Podcast, I was the official host of that one.
That's true. You were.
I'm pleased to not be doing all of that
except
now.
when we made Peyton.
Oh yeah, we did.
If you are an OG listener, you know who Peyton is, and
you do indeed.
He did it a couple times, but it was.
We'll have to bring Peyton on to talk about his amazing TikTok account that's just exploding.
That's true. We should bring Peyton on.
Indeed.
All right. So today's just going to kind of be a photo news wrap-up day because there's a lot. I guess it's a lot. It's interesting stuff going on.
Yeah. There's only one, I guess, like real like lens or camera that's being
announced,
released, I guess.
But the Z9 has been announced. It's just we don't know that much about it. I think that's the twist there. But the official announcement is that we have Sony finally has a 1.2 lens, the 15 millimeter.
Indeed. The rumors that they were incapable of making a 1.2, at least a 50 millimeter 1.2, have been
yes, exactly.
I guess destroyed. I don't know who believed that. But.
I don't know that anyone, because there's been 1.2 glass from other companies on Sony for a long time.
Like Midicon and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all 50s, right?
As far as I know, yes, they are 50s. But we know you can put the Canon 50 or 85 1.2 on there, the old EF mount one with an adapter and stuff.
Right. So
I don't know.
I feel like that's a little bit was a red herring or whatever you would say. Like, I haven't actually heard that much, and everyone's saying like that's what everyone always said, that it wasn't possible. And I don't know. I think it's kind of funny that that's been the discussion point about this lens.
Well, I think in 2018 when Canon and Nikon released their new mounts, which granted, Nikon led with a 0.95 lens, which is a little faster than 1.2.
Yes. Yeah, it's a little faster.
Granted, didn't have autofocus and a bunch of other like quirky things about that specific lens. But the whole idea was the bigger flange distance allows faster apertures. I actually don't know if that's really the advantage that they're trying to say. Maybe it allows better image quality at higher apertures. Who knows? But I think it's more about like the size and weight and the
wide angle.
Works.
I think there's more you can do with wide angle with a bigger mount.
Mm-hmm.
From my understanding, I don't think it has as much to do with aperture. So, but anyway, I mean, this seems like an amazing lens from all accounts. It's a little smaller, a little lighter, and a little cheaper than the Canon and Nikon version. So I guess that's a nice bonus for Sony.
Yeah, for sure.
Which, and that means it fits better with Sony ergonomics, because I don't know that like the 51.2 Nikon, which is kind of quite big, would even be that. Well, I guess it's about the same size as the 135.
Yeah, for sure.
G Master. So it's a notch little smaller. It's about the same size, and everyone says that it's super sharp. Like, obviously we haven't been using it at all, but.
So if you could really quickly look in the, or I'm looking in the B&H specs panel. And it looks like the minimum focusing distance is 40 centimeters, which is, I don't know, looks like it says 15.7 inches, which is pretty far.
Yeah, that's not amazing.
Let me convert 40 centimeters to inches, though. I'm wondering if it's a glitch, because I don't know that 40 centimeters is 15 inches.
Could be.
It is 15 inches, exactly. Well, the reason why I'm saying that is I have Canon's RF pulled up here. I guess it's translating it to feet, maybe 1.3 feet.
Which would be about 15 inches.
Which would be about 15
inches. So
inches.
it's almost exactly the same.
It's almost exactly the same. And then Nikon's is 1.5 feet. It's funny how they have it for Canon and Nikon, it's in feet, and for Sony, it's in inches.
It is. The specs on B&H, in some ways, they're the easiest to reference, but they're all over the place on what they say. Like sometimes it says grams for weight instead of pounds. You know, this is a 1.7 pound, that's a little lighter than the Canon and Nikon. The Canon and Nikon are around 2 pounds.
The 2.09 pounds for Canon, 2.4 pounds for Nikon.
Something, I've watched several videos about this lens, and something that I haven't seen much about is the transmission. I'd be very curious as to what the T-stops on it are. Because I know that 1.2 lenses oftentimes are 1.4 T-stop, like the 35-1.2 from Sigma. Also, that's on Sony, and it's 1.2. So that's super funny that everyone was like, Sony in your face. And it's like, there's been 1.2 lenses on Sony for a long time. But
yeah, for sure.
Anyway, it's kind of funny. But that lens, the transmission is still only 1.4, maybe even not quite 1.4. I've heard that several times. It's, it's got that, the background blur is 1.2, but the actual light transmission isn't 1.2. So, and I believe Canon's is pretty, from what I understand, is very close to 1.2. And I don't know about the Nikon one. The Nikon one's a little bit of a mystery to me. I've not researched that lens much at all. So
the little bit of research I've done on it, just sort of more because I was watching a bunch of videos on the 50-1.8 on a lens hunt I've been on for a while, which we can maybe talk about later. But it seems like it's a great, very sharp lens. Like, it just seems like it's a good lens. I don't like, the thing is pretty soon we're going to get comparisons of the 3 lenses, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And then
those videos are coming.
We're really going to get a viewpoint. The only thing with those videos that sometimes bothers me is it's, there is copy variation within lenses, even high-end glass like this.
Yeah.
And you could crucify a lens because you just had a bad copy or something in those kinds of comparison videos. Like, I understand that it would be really hard to get in like 3 of each lens or something and test them for the best one and then test those against each other or something like that. But copy variation is a real thing within lenses. So it's always interesting when people compare them and it's like, well, this lens is sharper than that lens. It's like, well, when you're talking about such minuscule differences, which I'm sure they're small between these lenses from an image quality perspective, you could definitely see that just causing some misnomers for people about which lens is the sharpest, I guess.
Well, and another issue is that, like, you're also then comparing the 3 different cameras too.
That's very true.
Like, there's a lot of, and how the cameras process the lens data, like, the corrections you can turn on and off sort of now, but that's even getting fuzzier and fuzzier. The camera companies are doing more and more automatic corrections. That's why you have to do firmware updates to even use a lens oftentimes. The 100 to 500 is an example of that. The 24 to 200 on the Nikon Z9, the lens wouldn't even work really when you put it on it. And then I updated the firmware and it worked fine. So that's kind of funny.
That is funny, yeah.
But so, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about with this lens. It's a 51.2. There's a lot of those out. So
once again, Sony is very good at getting their lens into a bunch of people's hands.
Yes.
That's just textbook. They do a really good job at doing that at this point. And I think it really helps their, it actually really helps their, at least online presence when you talk about the community that's actually on YouTube and stuff. I think it does help that community make purchasing decisions and jump on lenses that maybe they otherwise wouldn't jump on or wouldn't really pay that much attention to. And there's 10 new videos about it. And generally speaking, very positive, because I'm sure it's a great lens.
Yes. And it is nice that it's the same size as the 51.4 Zeiss that they've had. So that's, that's always been, the difference between 1.4 and 1.2 isn't that much. And that's always been part of it, is that to get 1.2, you have to get such a bigger lens. And to have it be the same size, that's a great bonus, and I feel like it just means that the 50 going for this will be the 50 for Sony going forward. I'm not a gigantic 50 fan. It's oftentimes a lens that has really great image quality, so I've shot with them before, but I've not ever just loved it. It's so, it's kind of a normal. It's called the normal focal length, right? Because it's kind of what your eye, I guess, is able to focus on. Is about 50 millimeters. Is that your mental perception? And so, as you know, I shoot panos. I've shot panos with 50s before and liked some of them. But generally speaking, like for landscape photography, just a 50 shot, they definitely happen. But it's never been a perfect match for me. So, I'm always, I go back and forth with 50s because, you can get this outstanding image quality with them. Like, for instance, when I was shooting Sony, the 55-1.8, that lens, really great image quality. I just never wound up using it that much. So
my main experience with a 50 mil is on an APS-C camera, so it's 75 millimeter field of view anyway.
Right.
But for a while, I had the D500 and I had the AFD 50 mil, and I took it out in the fall of, this was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I actually really enjoyed that, but that is more of an 85 field of view,
which I like for landscape. Yeah.
And I feel like honestly, 50 millimeters, like 75, a little bit wider than 85. I actually feel like that was a really good sort of just have fun lens, 50 mil on an APS-C camera, because it's a really nice kind of in between.
A lot of people shoot with that combo because they have nifty 50. So it's so, you get a cheap APS-C lens, a cheap APS-C body, and then you get the full frame nifty 50 because it's $150 for years and years and years. It used to be that. So I think a lot of people, the 75 that's what they think of 50, and then they get it on full frame and they're like, oh, it's wider and different.
Yeah. And 35 in the end, I think I prefer 35 over 50 just in general.
Generally speaking, yes. And when I'm doing focal lengths, I like 35 to 24. Like if I'm using a 24-70, I generally shoot 35 to 24 and then between 60 and 70. Sometimes I do 40. 40 can be interesting, but 50, but that's part of the advantage of it is that it's not telephoto, it's not wide, it's not extreme, so you can do a lot of things with it. But
I do feel like it helps you get a little bit, like for portraits, 85 can turn into a little constricted feeling, and it's just a little more relaxed with 50 mil. Those kind of portraits just tend to be a little bit more, there's more environment around them. And with a 1.2 on all of these lenses, you still get a lot of ability to still blow out the background, similarly to like a 51.4. Excuse me, an 85-1.4, but you get a little bit wider field of view, so you can do more context, have more bokeh,
right.
Those kinds of kind of stylistic decisions.
So, do you think an 85-1.2 is coming for Sony?
Well,
probably.
I guess the question is if the mount can handle 85-1.2.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and that's really the question.
I think my prediction is yes. It's not that urgent for Sony. Like the focus isn't that great on the 85G Master, but the image quality is outstanding. I've used that lens a lot. There's a lot of images in this gallery taken with that lens. So that's probably my favorite Sony lens. And that's probably part of the problem is that was kind of the only lens I really loved with Sony. I mean, the 135 I did and the 24. So like, those were the lenses that I loved with Sony, but the zoom lenses and several other ones, I just never fully fell in love with. So
when you got to play with the Canon 51.2,
I did get to play with it, and it was an amazing, beautiful lens. It just came down to I just don't reach for 50, So it became not worth that expensive lens. I couldn't justify it. So.
All right.
Well, we can move on to We should probably talk about, I guess we can just real quick address that there's a new version of Lightroom out. 10.2, there's performance improvements. They're doing a tethered live view for Nikon beta. So this is interesting. It's an actual, it's not tethered shooting. It's a tethered live view that has controls for focus and camera controls and stuff. So you could change the aperture and shutter speed and stuff like that. So that's very interesting. It says it's still a beta. So, but you can try that out, and support for new cameras and lenses. So that's kind of, so it's a small update, but it's not as big as the new Photoshop update, which I don't know if you heard about that.
I have not heard about that.
That added basically resolution. You can up the resolution in Camera Raw of an image. You can the default is to double it. It seems to work okay. I haven't actually played around with it yet, but it seems to work okay from what I've seen. But it's what's interesting is that it's kind of convoluted how to get to it. But you should check that out. And you know what? Maybe this week I'll try to play with it, and we can talk about it on the next podcast if it's significant.
Indeed. Or maybe even make a video about it, eh?
So Canon has a couple of big rumors. One's kind of a sure thing. The firmware update for the R5 and the R6 seems, and the 1DX Mark III, for those who are using that, seems very imminent. That's going to add C-Log 3, RAW, Cinema Raw Lite, and 1080 120
for the R5. Yeah,
for the R5. Yeah,
this is actually a somewhat of a big deal because the major critique against Canon's R5 and R6 was definitely that the dynamic range was lower than the other camera companies. Definitely lower than Sony and Panasonic.
Right. In log.
In log, we're talking like you could get 11 stops max out of the R6 and R5, and now with C-Log 3, it should bring it up to about 13, which is very
comparable
to the competition. I mean, in practicality, it's like 12.5, probably more. Of course, Canon also released the C70, which has like 16 stops or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
Love the image off the C70. Every time I see a video shot on that, I get a little FOMO, but it's okay. We'll just let that go. And 1080 120p on the R5 makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it kind of is odd that wasn't there to start with. That's one of those features. It's just like, what are you doing? Partly because the 120, the 4K 120 is a pain to edit. And then also, I would hope that this 1080 120 isn't where it has to be slow-mo with no audio, like the 4K 120 is. Like it has no audio and it has to be slow, whereas this you can do speed ramps and stuff like that. I guess you could do speed limits by just manually speeding it up, but this is going to be easier for, I think, some people. And then,
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be just easier to store and record. And it's, the R5 and R6 still are kind of legendary for having, being difficult codecs to edit. So
a lot of people are having issues with it. Tyler Stallman was just talking about in his recent podcast that he's frustrated editing R5 footage. I never had a lot of problem with it, but I edited quite a few.
Does he use Premiere?
No. He is a huge Final Cut. Because he releases all those tutorial videos on Final Cut. So
yeah, Final Cut for the most part works really well, and it makes it even worse when it slows down.
That is true. That is the thing with Final Cut, is that it works so well most of the time. When there is an issue, it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Whereas when you opened up Premiere, you you had to spend 5 minutes mentally preparing for the grind.
Yeah,
sometimes.
At least on our Apple laptops. I don't know. Like, I don't know what I was doing wrong, but it never worked well.
Yeah.
No matter what I did. And with we're repeating ourselves from the whole Final Cut episode, but the ability to put in graphics and track stuff and just everything's better about it.
Basically, just an update that the switch to Final Cut has continued to go very well.
Yes.
I think we're very happy.
Until the last edit was really hard for some reason. But I'm gonna do some research into why that happened. I think and hopefully
I think
figure
it's
it
your
out.
hard drive was too full.
It was probably either the hard drive was too full, or maybe it is worth storing the footage in the library, even though it doubles the size of the footage because it's copied over twice. It may be worth it just to make it a little faster. Because like in some ways, right at the end of an edit is when I want to see it smoothly the most, because I'm like trying to put in the final touches. Anyway, that was kind of irritating, so I'm going to see if I can solve that. But do we want to move on to the big kahuna story here?
Well, we should talk about the other Canon story before we do that.
Oh, yeah.
That it seems, now Canon rumors claims it's confirmed that a Canon EOS R5c is going to be announced this year, probably released early next year. It says a CR3, which means that they're pretty confident. So what do you think about this camera? What's it going to be? I mean, is it just going to be an R5 that actually doesn't overheat, or what's it going to have?
It says in the rumor, I think it said the same video specs as the R5, which I thought was interesting. It would be a little weird if they released an R5c 2 years later without doing something to it, though.
Yeah.
So my guess is that they may be adding a fan or something, not dissimilar from the A9, the A1, and all of those.
The A1 has a fan?
Oh, sorry, the FX3.
Yeah.
Sorry. It sounds like just an FX3 competitor. So
Or
it sounds like to me.
Right. So, yes. I mean, you probably have a fan. It's probably going to, I would imagine, have two CF Express card slots rather than an SD.
Yeah, it probably will have like dual recording options. Hopefully it doesn't overheat.
Unlimited recording, maybe.
That would be really nice, honestly.
Yeah. So, but it says it would come with C-Log 2 when they're just upping the R5 to C-Log 3. So that's weird.
Well, I guess in that case you'd have C-Log 1, 2, and 3, and you'd use them for different situations because
right.
They each level is flatter, which means each level is harder to grade, basically.
And you think it'll have the same sensor? I mean, if it's the R5, it would make sense, or would it have a lower megapixel count to have higher video quality? Well, they're probably going to want it to shoot 8K, so no, that doesn't make any sense.
I guess they could drop it enough so it barely shoots at 8K or something. But
yeah.
I don't. My guess is it's going to be like the one DC from years ago, the first Canon camera that shot 4K basically internal.
Oh yeah.
My assumption is it's going to be similar to that, where it just has a few bells and whistles, maybe a feature or two. Raw video is, I think, becoming something rapidly that they're wanting to implement. I mean, like, for example, with the new firmware update, they're adding raw light to the R5 and the 1DX Mark III, so Cinema Raw Light, so just an easier to work with raw profile. And with the new Nikon firmware update that was released a little while ago with 4K 60 and the better eye autofocus, they also added Black Magic RAW through the Atomos Ninja recorder.
Right.
So in Black Magic RAW, like, the whole shtick with that is you get the benefits of RAW in a easier to edit and work with file size, and it's easier to store it and everything else. So that kind of hybrid RAW arena of video shooting is definitely coming in. So we could see them try to make that a bigger deal in the R5C potentially.
Yeah. And I'm guessing it will have all the same stills capabilities. So
Yeah, in theory anyway.
in theory. So yeah, that'd be cool.
May have an aliasing filter though.
Okay. So let's talk about the Z9, because this is probably the biggest news, because it is official. We have pictures of it, a picture of it, frustratingly. Mm-hmm. And Nikon is entering the fully flagship Pro line like we thought they would. Mm-hmm. They called it the Z9, which we thought they might switch to the Z1 because they've been copying Sony so hard with some stuff that we thought they might. But nope, they stuck with Z9.
The Z1's still coming.
Right.
You know.
And it is, so here's what we know. We know that it is, well, it's gripped. So that's exciting. We know it has a backed sensor like the A9, A1 series. It may even have the same sensor as the A1. We know that Nikon is still buying Sony sensors. Now, they buy them, there's some misinformation out there about that. The images won't look the same because Sony manufactures them to Nikon's spec. So Nikon, gives Sony the specs that they want Sony to manufacture for a certain thing. They don't just be like, oh, here's the same sensor from the A1, just put it in your body housing. And the images, anyone who's shot with a D850 or a Z7 knows that the images look different than with an A7R or a, camera like that.
Or even like the Z6 probably has the same electronics.
The same electronics as the
A7 III.
But it looks very different.
It does.
But it seems like this is going to be, this is Nikon was kind of going through a bad news cycle, and then they announced this and being like, hey, we're really invested in the system. Like, here comes this legit camera that they say is replacing they literally said it was replacing the D6. So, they look at it as completely
the ultra professional, the one they'll want you to take to the Olympics. Although it probably won't be here for the Olympics this year.
Well, that's not probably true. It probably won't be like officially there, but it will be at the Olympics in a lot of people's hands. I think that's part of it, is that they're like, hey, you're probably going to see this camera at the Olympics. My guess is that we're going to see a late July announcement, early to mid-September release would be my bet on this camera.
I'd maybe push that back to more like the end of the year, maybe.
What makes you think that?
Well, it's just I think somebody was saying they announced the D6, and it was like 9 months ish after they announced it to when the D6 was actually like in stock on B&H. So, and I guess I think it was Jared Poland was saying it. That's kind of consistent with like the D5 and stuff before that.
Right. I guess that's true.
I mean, I think that there's maybe a little bit more pressure on Nikon to get this out the door. Maybe it's still just a camera not a ton of people are going to actually buy.
But you look at, so is the A1, and look at what it's done for Sony. Like, it's kind of taken Sony into the stratosphere a little bit. Everyone, it's kind of, it is an interesting situation to me that it has so similar to the R5. Yet it seems to have gotten a level of respect.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're a still shooter, I mean, there's that very controversial Tony Northrup review of the two, the comparison between the R5 and the A1, that the R5 kind of keeps edging out the A1
in some very interesting, like, I don't know quite what to make of that review. I'll just be honest with you. Like, I like Tony Northrup generally. He does seem to have this way of getting results that no one else gets. And to me, that's either a really good thing or a really bad thing. Like, it either means that like you're able to really break it down in a way that no one else can, or you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, or like he basically made the review that made the R5 look better, made a ton of people mad. But at the end of the review, if you actually watch the whole thing, he ends it basically saying, I like the A1 more than I like the R5. Like the A1 is in my opinion a better camera overall than the R5, and it better be. I mean,
right,
it is a higher end camera than the R5
It's much more expensive, yeah.
I mean, on the R5, you can get it now for $3,300. I was just looking on eBay yesterday, so it's much cheaper than it used to be.
Gosh, yeah. Wow.
And a lot of people don't buy used, and I respect that. So you're still talking about $3,900.
right.
versus 6500. But the Z9 is trying to jump into that market. What do you think is the price that they're gonna?
I think it'll be 65. I think it'll be 65. I'd be a little surprised if they go above, because there were that crazy rumors about the R1, which the more I look at it, the more I think they're not real. I think that was a fake thing, and Canon rumors guy really thinks it's not real. I think that the R1 will be very similar to the A1 and then this camera. I think that this camera might be 60 megapixels. There's been a couple of things bouncing around that it might have 10 more megapixels. That's not going to make much of a difference. The difference between 42 and 60 isn't that big, and 50 and 60 won't be that big. So, very comparable. The grip to me is a big deal. I have kind of always wanted a mirrorless pro gripped body like those. I felt like Olympus did it several years ago, and that was really cool. I've just always kind of been waiting for someone to do it, and it seems like Nikon's going to finally do it. So that's cool. And when you kind of super analyze this image, you can see they're bringing in some things from their DSLR days that I really like. You can see that they're going to have illuminated buttons, because on the power dial around the shutter button, you can see that you can do that. They have the 2-button format, which is a big deal. We don't see the back of the camera at all. So we don't know whether they've done a normal screen and then a smaller info screen, or whether they did one giant screen, or what they've done back there. But
a lot of real estate back there.
A lot of real estate back there in this gripped body, and it would be fun to see if they've really leveraged it in a way that is really cool. I've seen concepts of gripped mirrorless bodies that have a square screen on the back, so that a big square screen, so that when you're using it in either orientation, you're getting the same size of image.
Well, yeah, and then you got so much room above and below to display the information you need to see, so you can leave the image
right, very clean.
Very clean.
So I've seen concepts of that. I mean, obviously we're kind of wish casting right now on what we would like to see, because most likely it's going to look similar to the back of a D6. As I would guess that's what my money's on. But
yeah, I mean the front looks like a D6.
Right, it is smaller. A lot of people were saying like, "Wow, it's the same size as the D6." They have actually done measurements, and it's a chunk smaller than the D6. So that's good. And I'm sure it's going to have a new type of battery that will hopefully be like super amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd hope for a gripped body. That's part of the advantage of a gripped body. So
yeah, it would be nice to see this particular camera, get back that like 3-day battery life or whatever.
Oh yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, for that you used to have with those like 1DX2 and stuff like that. So what do you think frames per second we're looking at? There's no information on this except it has a new processor and a stacked sensor. So where do you think that's all going to land?
My guess is that it's going to shoot 20 frames a second, both electronic and mechanical. That's what I think its big thing is going to be, is that when you switch to mechanical, you're still getting 20 frames a second. That's just my prediction. I don't think it's going to go up to 30. First off, it seems like 30 is a little bit of a it seems like the A1 is in actual use closer to 15 to 20 most of the time. And, that just is the way that these cameras are. Is like in use with autofocus and everything else, it's significantly lower. But you keep raising that bar so that, eventually it will be where you are shooting 20 frames a second with full autofocus and tracking and everything else. But I'm guessing that it's going to shoot 20 frames a second, mechanical and electronic. I think it's going to be blackout free. I think it's going to they will have done that.
It better be, I guess.
Yeah, at this point it better be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to shoot 8K. They confirmed it's going to shoot 8K. So that means that the minimum is around 50 megapixels, 45 to 50 megapixels.
I guess there is the potential, like there's a little room that 8K could mean I guess time lapses or something like it did with the D850. But
No, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't announce that in the.
It definitely means that the sensor's that resolution, at least 50. I guess 45. It could be as low as 45.
It says 8K video recording. It says that. So that doesn't mean time lapse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really hoping for that. I mean, it definitely seems like that's what they're saying. It's going to be really interesting to see how it's implemented. Is it A1 implementation where you can if you have enough card space, you can record it no problem? Is it R5 implementation with overheating, or
it's hard to know with Nikon and video? They'll either surprise you or it just won't be.
Well, Nikon's been moving in this direction of really improving their video, not dissimilar from Fuji. I mean, these are two companies that 2015, 2016 they weren't even in the conversation, and they are now.
Right.
And this is a big opportunity for Nikon. I'm trying not to get too wish-casty here, as we were saying earlier, but
right.
I think that there is potential that we could see some of the raw recording capabilities very seriously that we found in the external recording on the R6 and on the Z7. Excuse me, the Z6 and the Z7 cameras.
Yeah, the Z6 and Z7. Yeah.
That we're going to be able to see that on this camera. And I'm partially basing that off of the fact that the 1DX3 shoots raw video internal.
Yes. Yes.
So that means the R1's going to shoot raw internal video in more usable, like it's not just 8K like it is on the R5, which is great that it has that feature. But if they could get 4K raw recording in this camera and 10-bit with N-Log internal recording on this camera. I mean, I think we've talked about it before. There's a lot of features floating around Nikon right now that are kind of in this world of external recording that if they get it into the camera, the conversation really starts to shift from
right.
Nikon being kind of behind the other camera companies with certain features that kind of excel beyond them, like the Z6 II handles 4K 60 recording. I can say firsthand experience, handles it better than the R6 does. And it also can shoot raw, the R6 can't.
Right.
Sony doesn't have anything that competes with it at that price point.
Yeah, I mean, it is true when you really think about it, that for the price point, Nikon is bringing some video features.
Yeah.
And then, it's been said before, but it bears repeating that Nikon does not have a cinema line to protect.
Mm-hmm.
Both Canon, Sony, Panasonic, all these other companies, I don't know about, no, obviously not Fuji, but Fuji has those cinema lenses, those Fujinon cinema lenses that are super cool, but they don't have a cinema line of cameras. But Nikon, this could be the top. Like, and if they're really invested in the future and stuff, they're not going to be hurting anything by throwing the kitchen sink at cameras like this and really capturing attention of a market segment that is continuing to grow. This kind of middle pro tier camera segment is just continuing to grow, especially as video is like the future of social media is video. I think stills are not really going to be a factor that much in social media in the future. Which is, it's interesting. Like, it's just like, you look at TikTok and now Instagram and everything. It's just video is the future for a lot of stuff. I think stills are always going to have their place. They're going to be important for things.
Well, I think stills are more entertaining to shoot. Maybe, like, I think it's funner to engage with stills, but we can talk about that on a different
that's true,
different day. But I agree. I think that more and more shooters are going to be hybrid just in general, but I think more and more shooters are going to start being videos the first thing that they do, and photos are the second thing that they do.
Right. Well, and if you're a Canon or a Sony shooter right now, you need to be hoping that Nikon does this. You need to be hoping that Nikon is doing this, because that will finally force Sony and Canon's hand on some stuff that they just have been holding out on forever because they want it in the cinema line. But if this camera, if the Z9 is able to compete with something like the FX5, or I don't even know all of the the cinema cameras, the C300 or whatever. If it really is able to compete with those, Canon and Sony are going to be forced to start bringing those features down into the cameras, which is just going to make it better for everyone, because cinema is going to kind of end.
Well, I don't know if it's the cinema.
Well, no, it's not going to end, but you're not going to be. No, that I didn't mean that. But
well, you're touching on a point though, that there's a certain brand of person that's using a cinema camera because of certain very specific features that aren't just the shape of the camera, because that's like the number one thing, is the shape of the camera is just more useful for working with a team, because that's really like the C500 is so huge because, for a reason. There's 3 people working on the camera on set at any given time. So you need a lot of space for everyone to kind of work around the camera, plug all the stuff that needs to be plugged into it. You need buttons on all the sides, and that's a completely different situation than like one person trying to shoot an independent documentary or something like that.
Or just content
on
because we've touched on this before, but the content is really changing in just globally. Like how content is consumed and who is making it is regular people are making are like a lot more content out there is being consumed by regular people than ever before, and giving people better tools to do that with. Like it is, in a lot of ways, it's a rush to do that. It will be.
Well, and tools built for, like, as much as there's a tool built for 3 people doing a high production, or a production company doing a high-end production, there's going to be tools for one person doing a high-end, like one videographer doing a production with, high quality standards. And I think that's the direction things are going. That's what Blackmagic's gambling their whole business structure on. Right. I mean, they have the Ursa form factor cameras, but even those are, a little smaller, a little more angled at that direction. So if the Z9 kind of pulls a lot of the stuff together, and there's a bunch of like little things Nikon needs to do. They need to remove the record limit.
Yep.
They need to do that. That's more important than 8K. I honestly think it is. And they're putting 8K in there, but that doesn't mean they're removing the record limit.
Right.
They need to remove that and Canon needs to too. That's just something Sony's holding over their heads at this point.
At this point it is.
Because a lot of people are sitting in front of their cameras and talking for a long time and then chopping that footage up and stuff like that. And you can use external recorders and stuff. We're using one right now on a camera with a record limit, and doesn't have one because we're using a recorder, but those kinds of workarounds aren't something you necessarily want to focus on.
Right. It is nice being able to just point your camera at something and press record and just let it do its thing.
It is, yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, we may be over wishing on the video on this camera. I mean, I think that Nikon's probably looking at it as being sold to sports and wildlife photographers and landscape photographers and a lot of in between. Upping the megapixels allows you to do that. I think another advantage, and this doesn't have to be an advantage for the Z9, like I think Canon and Sony could do something about it, is that Nikon's the only company right now doing tiered RAW file sizes. So like on a Z7, Z7 II, D850, you can select, I would like to shoot 24 megapixel RAW files right now. RAW files, not JPEGs, RAW files. And I think I would like to shoot even I think 12 megapixel RAW files. Like, so you have tiers of RAW files. So you put a 60 megapixel sensor in here, you're still going to have your wildlife shooters are going to be like, or your wedding shooters or whatever. They'd be like, I only need 20 megapixels. So, and I want the buffer and frame rate to work. So I'll do that. I do not understand why Sony and Canon won't do this. It seems relatively simple, and you don't lose image quality. In my opinion, you're probably not getting quite as good high ISO, right? So you're not getting bigger pixels. So like it's in that sense, the on the Z7, if you're shooting in 24 megapixel mode, it's not the same as shooting on a Z6, right? But generally speaking, you're not losing sharpness or dynamic range or anything like that.
And I suppose it depends on how it's doing it, because downsampling can provide you with a better image. I mean, we know that from video at this point, or it can make an image sharper, and it actually can make an image cleaner too. That's how it works with video. So I don't know if that's how it works with stills. Maybe we should do some tests on that.
Yeah, no joke. We maybe should
and figure out kind of what happens when you do that.
Another rumor it's only sort of a rumor, but something that I would like to see is them get the native ISO down even lower than 64. Now, obviously 64 is great, and you do see a dynamic range bump from ISO 64 to ISO 100, which is what Canon and Sony are shooting. But if they could get it down to 50, like you get even more of that dynamic range in camera, like that would be amazing. Like the ISO 64, now I'm shooting with the Z7 some again. Like it adds a level of dynamic range that I really like editing with. So, so to see that even get down lower.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think that the real core of the Z9 though is a little bit of a statement from Nikon that's Nikon's not done yet. And I don't entirely know where the Nikon's done whole thing exactly is coming from.
Well, I think partly it is that like people need to do what we're doing right now, is make content about the different companies and everything. And it seems like there always has to be one of the companies that's being beat up on.
Well, and one of the companies that's doing just so amazing as well.
And they are. I mean, if you look, they're taking turns. Like for a long time, Sony was a little bit of a joke, a little bit. I think people started taking them seriously fairly quickly, but especially as people started switching to them, because the great Sony Switch-a-thon was probably, what was that, 2015 to 2016?
Kind of R2. I feel like the
R2,
A7R2,
right around the A7R2 time. And then in that time, Canon became the whipping boy of the industry. They released the
6D Mark II.
6D Mark II and the 5D Mark IV, which were both like great cameras. I used the 5D Mark IV professionally for over a year, and it was a great camera. It wasn't state of the art in comparison, but they really were. Like everyone was like, Canon is going to leave, and people were saying that about Canon. And then Canon now announced, the R5 and the 1DX3 and the R6, and now all of a sudden Canon is, back on top with Sony, and it just is a rotation. So I think that's part of it. I feel like you have to create a narrative, and there has to be somebody, there has to be a loser or whatever. It feels like, even though I don't think that's actually true.
Well, and I think that it just shows that camera companies have a lot more. They can survive on a lot less than people think, because the Olympus keeps limping onward. Like everyone thought they shut down, and they're still selling cameras and lenses with plans to release more. Like I realize that they're not ever going to be, Olympus doesn't have the potential like Nikon does to become top dog with just the path they decided to go down. Right. But that doesn't mean there's not space for them. Like I think I read in an article that right now, the mirrorless market, Nikon owns 7% of it. 7% of an international market that has many companies involved. many companies that have been doing it for a long time. And I think people miss that Canon in their EOS M line's been going for a long time. They've been doing their mirrorless line.
Right.
And Nikon's sort of response to M was the Nikon 1 line of cameras that was not successful.
No.
It was a tiny sensor format.
It was 1 inch, wasn't it?
Something like, it was like an interchangeable 1-inch sensor line that just
What a disaster.
did not go well. And no one bought it. So when you look at Canon's mirrorless share, they're wildly successful M lines in there. And when you look at Sony, you're talking about a camera company since the Nexus line that's been making mirrorless cameras, and they're all over the place by now. Like,
yes.
And Sony's done a great job building their mirrorless market for a long time. And Nikon is 2 years in, despite all of that, two and a half years by now, I guess.
2.5, yeah.
No, more like 2 years, because it was halfway through 2018, I guess.
They announced it in July 2018.
And
this is March 2021.
Yeah. So I guess with 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And they've got 7% market share. That's really, to me, that doesn't sound that bad.
Right. Well, and then, Nikon ultimately, I think what they're wanting and they're going to see more of is like they've been banking on DSLRs. They've been the only one still kind of releasing DSLRs. Last year they released the D780, the D6, right? And then the D850 is the only DSLR that still competes. Like the D850, that's what's amazing about the D850 is that it still competes. You could buy a D850 right now and you're going to be shooting, you have a OVF version, of the Z7 in a lot of ways. Like in the image quality is going to be as good as anything that the more modern cameras are, mirrorless cameras are shooting. So that's what's amazing. And I think Nikon's looking at it and they're like, okay, we want to keep our D850 customers and our D6 customers. And we're going to start converting them over, and they're going to start moving over into mirrorless. Some of them already have, but a lot of them will probably over the next 2-3 years. You look at the lifespan of the D850, it's probably going to really start hitting a wall. I mean, if you're shooting video, they hit the wall a long time ago, but
I mean, I guess it depends if you need autofocus or not.
Right, exactly.
It hit the wall immediately if you needed autofocus.
But yeah, so I think that Nikon is they're saying like, well, we're going to get a chunk of those people. And, Sony was completely dependent on both new people entering the market, like Brandon, who's on the show quite a bit. Like he entered the market. I mean, he had a cheap
T3i.
Canon, a T3i or whatever for a minute. That doesn't really count. He entered the market with Sony, right? And in a lot of ways you did too.
Yeah, my first interchangeable lens camera was a Sony. It was an A-mount Sony. Which,
that's hilarious.
If you even know what I'm talking about, that's impressive.
So I think that Sony's had that, and then they've had switching. And Canon and Nikon haven't had that. You have people holding on to them. And then, 5D Mark IVs, a lot of people are still shooting a lot with Canon 5D Mark IVs. They just don't.
Well, and I think that people also need to understand that something I've observed over many years of watching YouTube camera media is people feel the need or I think it's somewhat easy to make a video about why you switch to a system.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of energy and time and thought processing to figure out if you really want to switch. And that turns into videos that also get views. So I think that when people talk about the great Sony switch, like not that many people switched in the grand scheme of things. Canon still owns the camera market.
Yeah, they really do.
They really do. And the YouTube community was a self-selecting group of people because to some degree they're interested in video, right? Sony was killing it with video for many years over what Canon and Nikon were offering. And that self-selecting group that also, had incentives to make videos about switching, they made those videos. But I think in the end, the market's not as different, I think, as people... I mean, it's different in that Sony's a big player now and owns a significant amount of market share, but it's not like Canon and Nikon lost 90% of their customers to Sony, and they're
right. I
limping
mean,
along.
it's true. It is true. And what another thing to keep in mind is that the camera market is changing, not because people are switching to another system, but because they're leaving altogether because they don't need a camera anymore. Like there was the need for a camera has shifted up into professional enthusiast, right? And it keeps going up and up and up. And I think eventually it will kind of cap out at, I honestly think that there's a chance that within 5 years, you're looking at the kind of the bottom of the market being like a Z6, like that being the bottom. Because, what would you need? Because a cell phone is going to be able to do everything kind of below that, right? Like it's infringing even on APS-C, and maybe like a Z50 or a 6400, 6600 maybe that really would be the bottom, like a high end APS-C body.
But still, those are those are a lot higher end cameras, much more capable than they used to be.
Right.
Like that bottom tier.
Right. That bottom tier used to be just, yeah.
And people I think that edge will survive because sometimes people do just need a camera because they can't use their phone. I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about how he was trying to shoot this tabletop, like looking down, and he was trying to use his phone over a couple days shoot and didn't want the camera to move, which was his phone.
Oh, yeah.
And suddenly realized that he needed to use his GoPro because he just needed it to not move. He needed just the camera to be separate from his phone, which is the big trade-off with your camera being in your phone is that your camera's in your phone. So if you want to do something specific, like take a time lapse or shoot video or whatever it is you're trying to do,
it's true.
Rig out your camera, which is then your phone. Then your phone doesn't do as good of a job being a phone.
Well, and also something that's designed to do something specific, is always going to be a better tool if it needs to be a tool, right? Like taking pictures of your kids at Disney World or filming a school play or, texting your wife a shot of the soap that she was wanting and if it was the correct soap, right? That kind of thing. A cell phone camera is great for, right? You don't need a different tool than that. The cell phone is the tool, right? Because you're going to share those videos or that photo. It needs to go to someone else. That's the tool. I do think that eventually that cell phone progress with cameras it is decelerating, right? It's not what it was, where every time it was mind blowing how much better. Now it's just a little better, right? Like with this most recent iPhone release, a lot of people were like, oh, these new cameras are going to be unbelievable. And then they got them in their hands and they're like, well, I guess I see a difference, right? That's kind of the if you were not a pro and really examining them, you wouldn't see a difference, right? So, and because of that deceleration, I think there's going to be people who are be like, well, maybe I do want a camera specific, right? Especially if cameras can start getting in some of these features, better shareability, but more, I'm thinking, shareability, yes and no. But I think more like machine learning and some of those stuff, some of the algorithms for that, the instant HDR and whatnot. Like if you could get an HDR photo handheld with a professional camera, that's a RAW file that, you import and it's a RAW file using multiple images, like an iPhone does now, that's going to be amazing. Like, and you see how much better is that going to be than an iPhone version of that? If you do a 60 megapixel,
oh dear.
Yeah, that's another thing altogether. If you do a 60 megapixel, HDR RAW file, with how many stops of dynamic range is that? Because it's, 15 stops in every direction, right? Who like it's on another level. And, you can do that, bracket it or whatever, but that's not very straightforward and requires a learning curve and a lot of editing and also taste. I think a lot of people get a HDR photo in their hands and they immediately make something so horrible.
Yeah, there's been some unfortunate things that have been made with HDR.
Hashtag that was me a few years ago. I remember making my first HDR and I went crazy. It looked so horrible. But well, that's probably about what we have time. Do you have any last thoughts about the Nikon Z9?
I think that it's encouraging as someone who just switched to Nikon. I'm very happy it's there, which is funny because we talked about on the last episode that just because they're adding features at the top end doesn't mean that it makes your camera any better.
Right, it doesn't make your camera any better. Right, we did talk about that.
It doesn't do that, but there is the element of it's nice to see Nikon doing something innovative. They are the first one with a mirrorless gripped Pro body, and obviously the A1 in function is just as capable, but I think that the gripped body is nice to see finally. It
is nice. It is nice to see. I'm seeing on here that it's rumored that it's going to have 16-bit RAW. Now that would be a big deal because it's 14-bit right now with everybody else, including the Z7 II.
Unless you're shooting Hasselblad,
right? So 16-bit RAW, that would be a big deal. So that'll be the parting thought, is that if 16-bit RAW is there, and that would be for stills, not for video. We probably confused people so bad with bouncing between stills and video so much.
Yeah, whatever. It's rough how they match up.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, if you enjoyed this video, we would love it if you'd hit the like button and subscribe for more fun camera content and mountain content. We have a brand new vlog out that you should go check out. And we will see you on the next adventure.
Yeah. Bye.